Police and night guards, what strange, odd, and spooky things have you seen? Story 1. Not so much working night shifts myself, so much as my work continuing through the night. About 7-ish years ago, I was working on a piece of software at my company which had camera recording functionality, but because of the platform and length of recording, it was actually taking stills every dozen or so seconds for a stop-motion film sort of thing. Anyway, one night I leave it going to ensure it can 1. Record its maximum length, and 2. Remain stable over long periods of time. So in the morning, I get in and sit down and review last night's footage for quality and stability shake. Quiet and still office with lights on and a couple people leave, lights turn off, darkness, darkness, darkness. But there, in the faint light from outside coming in through the window, I see something in the office move. I started to go back and forth between frames when the lights went off and when they came back on, and it seemed a chair had turned all before anyone came in. I sat there and reviewed the footage for a bit before talking with my supervisor, who informed me that the last shift last night ended around 9 p.m. and no one had entered the office between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. I shrugged it off and continued my daily work, but before I left for the night, I left the camera recording again. Come in the next day, I reviewed the footage, and again, a chair or two had been turned. I told my supervisor again, who again assured me that no one was in last night, but now he too was curious and asked around and was told absolutely no one was in the office at night. So now my supervisor asked me to leave the camera recording each night. And every morning we came in, we reviewed the footage, and every morning the footage showed chairs moved and turned. Some chairs had moved a few feet even. So, on one of the last nights of us using this software, we pointed the camera directly at the row where chairs kept moving. Then, with there no night shift that night, we pulled all the chairs to the front of the row to see where'd they be the next day. When we came in the next morning, it was evident they had been moved, as some had been turned and one had been rolled back against the wall roughly 20 feet from where we left it. Reviewing the camera footage showed nothing moving smoothly, as it was 12-second frames. Only a set of chairs in a cluster, then a set of turned and slightly moved chairs, and one single chair 20 feet away from the others. We never got a good explanation. We checked with all departments and the cleaning crew. No one had a reply that backed up why the chairs would move overnight. Is it just me, or are the most kind of boring and mundane ghost stories the ones that feel the most convincing? I'm a skeptic, but stories like this make me kind of question things just a little. Like, I feel like there must be some logical explanation, but it certainly doesn't seem made up or faked at least, because who would make up something this tame? Story 2. In college, I was a late afternoon shift, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., security guard at a chemical factory on Sunday. I don't know what kind of chemicals they made, but it consisted of 3 buildings whose prior use was an orange juice factory. It was cool, and the guy who would replace me at 11 was this big 6'3" black guy. He would sometimes get dropped off early, and we would just chill and talk. Well, I had to walk the property at 10:30 p.m. Every time I walked, I had no problems. Here's the thing, of the 3 buildings, 2 were for actually mixing, heating, emulsification, etc., and 1 building had administrative offices. The administrative office was always closed since it was the weekend. Well, one time, big black guy gets dropped off at 11:15 and he decides to walk with me at 10:30. So the administrative building is last, and as we're walking towards it, everything is off. We circle the building, and as we're walking back, the office light turns on. This was the first time I've ever seen this, and since no one is supposed to be there, I pull out my keys and start walking towards the building to enter and see if someone is inside. At this point, big black guy grabs my arm and tells me, "Don't go in there, just leave it." I turn and look at him, and his face looks dead serious, and he is looking right at me like, pardon the cliche, he's seen a ghost. You gotta realize, I'm 19 years old, still a kid inside really, and not afraid of anything, but looking at his face made me nope the F out of there. When we got back to the guard shack, he told me that once on his walk around 3 a.m., the same thing happened. He went in, and in the office it felt really cold. He turned off the light, and as he left the building, it turned on again. He re-enters, and as he's about to turn it off again, he says something pushed him from behind. Immediately, he turns around and exits the building and tells me he'll never step foot in that building ever again. I talked to one of the old workers there about it, and he said that when the place was a juice factory, the building housed a large juicer, and someone had an accident and died. Don't know if it's true, but the old worker told me he would never go in that building at night either. A few weeks later I quit, so I never had to deal with that again. Story 3. Oh, I've got one. When I was 18, I briefly worked nights as a care assistant in a nursing home. The building was a very old ex-convent and was pretty spooky at the best of times. There were 3 floors, but I was only ever working on the ground and first floors. One day, about 2 weeks in, I was sent up to the top floor to get something. It was my first time up there, and for the first time, it occurred to me how odd it was that I'd never worked up there before or seen any patients who lived up there. So I'm walking along the main corridor, which is pretty narrow and twisty. Being on a night shift, we kept the lights on emergency settings, very dim and on motion sensors, so that the residents can sleep. Suddenly, at the other end of the corridor, I see this dark shape. It looked like the Grim Reaper with a dark cowl and long robes, and was even holding what appeared to be some kind of scythe. And it was moving slowly towards me. I knew it wasn't a resident, as most of our residents were not ambulatory, and I was pretty sure none of them dressed in dark robes. So I did the logical thing. I turned without even thinking about it and sprinted back down to the first floor, where I managed to convey through panicky gestures that there was some kind of terrifying monster on the top floor. After about 5 minutes, my coworker stopped cracking up and explained my mistake to me. You know how I mentioned that the home used to be a convent? Well, apparently part of the deal was that the remaining nuns, who were all pretty old by now, got to continue living on the top floor without nursing care and use the facilities of the home, like cooked meals. And not a single person had thought to mention this to me. If I'd worked days, I would have seen them up and about, but the 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. night shift at a nursing home is pretty quiet. The shape I had seen was actually an elderly nun in robes and a head covering, wimple, with a crutch, not a scythe, heading down the corridor to their little chapel as she couldn't sleep. And not, as I had for some reason assumed, the Grim Reaper here to collect one of our residents. I switched off night shifts soon after that. And to be fair, I've had a few friends that went to Catholic schools, and I'm pretty sure they would have been more afraid of a nun than of the Grim Reaper. Honestly, either way, running seemed like the right call. Story 4. I worked at a group home for juvenile delinquents. The building we were in was a 1900s mansion turned orphanage before focusing on delinquents in the 70s. Pretty much all the long-time workers thought it was haunted. One worker had died from a heart attack and was revived. After that, he said he could see dark parts of the building. There were also incidents of workers seeing orbs, hearing kids laughing, and residents would report hearing noises in certain rooms similar to things heard by other residents they had never met before. Supposedly, one worker even saw a full-body apparition run through a door. Aside from hearing crashes, I never saw evidence that there was one weird thing that happened to me personally on a midnight shift. At around 6 a.m., I went downstairs to the kitchen to make coffee. As soon as I crossed the threshold into the kitchen, the door itself was open. The air felt heavy and I could hear voices and a dog barking. I checked the radio and it was off. The building itself was on a hill and far from the sidewalk, but I looked outside in case somebody was wandering on our property. Nobody was out there. The voices weren't loud enough to be audible. I made the coffee, and as soon as I exited the kitchen, door still open, the voices stopped and everything felt normal. Another time when I worked at midnight, something happened. Didn't freak me out, but sure scared my relief. At the time, we had a resident who had run away. That morning, my relief comes upstairs and is asking me if I'm okay and seems worried. I'm fine. Turns out what happened is, while in the parking lot, he saw a window was broken. He came inside and saw a pair of scissors laying on the ground next to a door. He thought the kid had come back and tried to kill me. I had no idea he was even there. We figured he was probably trying to get a cell phone that had been confiscated and put in an office. Still kind of scared to think about what might have happened if I had gone downstairs and caught him. The kid was small, but he is one of the few people I've met that I would consider a sociopath, so I don't think he wouldn't have stabbed me if he thought it would help him. Story 5. Years ago, I used to work as a security guard in an abandoned site complex that is now a heritage-listed site. At the time, there was a company trying to sell their land, so one other and I were employed to run the graveyard shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., to make sure kids didn't sneak in and burn the place down and generally mess it up. One night around 2 a.m., when it was quite dark, the other guard and I did our hourly patrol. Whilst he circled counterclockwise, I went through the center of 4 different buildings to check for holes in the fence. While I had my torch, I saw a young lady who couldn't have been more than 22 to 25 years old and quite pretty, although a little disheveled. She approached me and said that she was trying to find some men who had taken something from her. Of course, being the only one around, I asked her if there was anything I could do, including phoning the police to come by. She declined with a short smile and seemed pretty despondent. Figuring that she might try and hurt herself, I said that I was here if she needed help, but it was a dangerous area, so I would escort her out. At this point, she gave one of the most blood-curdling screams I've ever heard, and tears streamed down her face, a quicker change of mood I have never seen. Taken aback is the least of my feelings. She screamed, "I'll find them! I'll find them!" before sprinting behind one of the buildings. Took me a half a second to gather myself, but I started after her. Now, I seriously thought that A, she would harm herself or someone else, or B, drugs are a hell of a thing. She disappeared behind one of the buildings, and not half a second later did my partner waltz out from behind that same building. He had not seen anyone run past nor heard anything. That scream was loud. Long story short from here, it turns out that this ward was functioning before any of the normal guidelines came into force, and it was obvious people were treated worse than animals. Apparently, it was not unheard of for female psych patients to become pregnant, who knows where from, and subsequently their babies were taken from them at birth. I quit the next day, as did my partner. Nightclubs for me, thanks. Honestly, the fact that both you and your partner, who didn't even see anything, both quit after that incident? Yeah, I guess I can't blame you. If I had encountered that, I'm not sure I would have stayed the rest of my shift, let alone another day. Story 6. One of my friends was a security guard in an upscale apartment building in Manhattan. During the day, they had doorman and an elevator man, but at night it was just him in an office near the main entrance. One night, someone kept pushing the ringer for one of the apartments, and whoever lived there wasn't answering. It turned out to be a doctor who said that one of the residents had asked him for a house call because she didn't feel well, but that for some reason she wasn't answering. He let him in and went to escort the doctor up to her apartment, but as they approached the elevator, the doctor said he had changed his mind and would wait until the morning, and he was sure she'd be fine until then. He left. My friend goes back to his office, and a little while later, the main doors are signaled to open from the apartment of the woman, who the doctor had been there to see. He assumed that she had just now noticed that her door had been buzzed and she was opening it for him, unaware he had decided to leave. My friend went upstairs to explain that the doctor had come but then left. He knocked a few times and got no answer. Since the woman had said she was sick, then signaled the door downstairs but wasn't answering the door now, he thought something really serious might be wrong. He entered her apartment and found her dead. Even though she had just signaled from the control panel by her door, she had been dead far longer than that, like weeks. Residents who had staff like housekeepers could get door cards and keys for them to get in and out of the building instead of the doorman dealing with it. Most of the ones in the building were from the same agency, which was notorious for hiring Mexicans who weren't in the country legally. The police suspected the housekeeper had found the woman dead but didn't want to call the police herself out of fear that she would be questioned and something would happen to her. They figured she probably came in that night using her card so my friend wouldn't have noticed, called the doctor, tried to let him in, and then fled the building so police wouldn't deport her or something. But they never proved that. Weird story. Story 7. I worked nights. While on duty, it was an extremely slow night. The only things out there were the stars. There was fresh snow on the ground, there were no street lamps or illumination of any sort. That's why I liked it. Every cop has their secluded go-to spot on patrol. Well, mine was an abandoned campground. Anytime I needed to think or finish some paperwork, I would go there. I would go there frequently, so I felt comfortable there. Not on this night. As I was sitting there, I felt as if I was being watched. I felt extremely uneasy. I would check my mirrors every 30 or so seconds because of it. And if I wanted to look outside, I would press on the brake because it was dark enough that the red light would show the surroundings. Finally, I started focusing on my paperwork and not on my paranoia. About 10 minutes goes by. Rapidly, my car started shaking violently as if someone or something were trying to tip it over. My paperwork, food, and duty gear were flying all over my vehicle. I couldn't see anything, so I did what anyone else would do and put the car in drive and sped out of there as fast as I could. I drove to the place with the most lights I could find. I didn't want to be in the dark. I tried to make sense of it, but how could something be that close to the car and me not see it? We have elk and beat lives, so that has to be it, right? When I stopped freaking out, I got to my vehicle to assess the damage. The force that moved the car had to have left a dent or scratches. When I looked, both sides of the rear of the vehicle were covered in handprints. Freaked out. No one ever goes out there, ever. I called another buddy on his phone to come take a look. By what I described, he was just equally freaked out. We both gathered up the courage to go back and look for footprints in the snow. When we got there, all you see is my tire tracks and not a single footprint. I haven't gone back since, and never will. I don't know, either you have a little more eloquent way with your words than your average poster, or this is just a made-up story. I mean, I guess even the more poorly written ones can be made up, so who am I to judge? I guess what I'm saying is I'm skeptical, but you do have a nice way with words.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.